Okay, let's assume that I have been away for a cup of tea and I've come back. I need to let Qmatic know where it's got to set the new safe area since I've now advanced the quilt. I need to make sure that I don't advance it too much or I won't be able to fit the vertical borders in. So I've taken my sew head roughly to somewhere on the medallion pattern because that was easier to see. I'm going into actual size to see how accurate that was, and it's right on this pointy part here. Full view, green check. Right, so my safe area has now moved and the plan is to get the rest of these vertical borders done. So we'd better find out where we are now. So the safe area is set. Now I'm going to take the sew head and position it right over the last part of stitching on the vertical border that's already been stitched. My sew head crosshairs are indicating exactly where I want the next piece of pattern to join on. I think it's probably this piece here, which I've clicked and it's gone red. So if I go into actual size view, I'll be able to drag my red pattern piece right onto the crosshairs and come out into a full view. That's where it has to go. I won't be able to get this next section in as well because that's going to come out of the safe area. So I'll just stick some markers down and check that it's going to fit in. Use the sew head to show Qmatic where the border of the quilt actually is width-wise. And I shall just join those markers together. I just want to know that I've got enough width, and I do. I can zoom in and just check. So it does fit within the zone on the quilt that it should fit. And now, just to be on the safe side, I'm going to check that I've lined up the join properly. So I'm going to take my sew head back to the last stitches of this piece that I've already sewn. So the crosshairs are indicating exactly where the sew head and the last stitches are. So look, it's just moved such a tiny bit, but I'll just move it slightly. Okay, I'm ready to sew that now. So I'll go to sew options, I'll DQ all. I shall select that bit there. Green check, play, start. And Qmatic has stitched that right-hand section of the leafy border. I could come across and do the right-hand side, but I feel as though I could just stay over here on the left-hand side and do these other borders. So I'm going to move the sew head to correspond with the last stitches of the last bit of springy vertical border. So the sew head is showing where it is on the quilt, and I'm just looking to see how many pieces of spring I can fit in. That one is very close to the safe area, so I think we'll just go for 2 sections. I will just move the start-stop points so that they join on nicely. And that one. And then I shall join this section. I'll connect it and attach it to this section. So as you can see, sometimes you can do a nice big piece and sometimes you just do a little piece. That will do. I could place some markers, but I think I'm going to go without, because it's only a little section, so hopefully it's all going to fit. Just take that chance on this occasion. Go to sew options, DQ all, select just that short piece, and we'll get that sewn. Staying over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to get the next bit of shell vertical border done. I've shifted the sew head so that the crosshairs are right on one of these pointy bits of petal. I can do that bit and I can do that bit. So first we need to just check that they're going to join on nicely. Let's maybe move one of the start points. See if that will attach. Connect, attach. That's looking good. Then I need to go into actual sized view. And I need to move the red section so that that tail meets that crosshair. Looks okay, full view. Now I didn't put any markers down in my last skinny bit of border, so I will put some markers down this time, just to check my width. So I'll use the sew head, I'll just put 4 down, just to check that I've got enough space and it's not going to encroach in one of the other borders. There are the 4 markers. I've still got markers up from other areas. Doesn't matter as long as I'm not confused by them. Click them round. Okay. Let's go in for a closer look. Okay, so we can see that the red pattern is closer to this border on this side than it is on this side. It is within the zone that it's allowed to be. But if you remember, I did actually start to shrink the design on the other side because it was getting into another border where it shouldn't have been. But what I'm just going to do is double check that I've got the placement right. So I'm going to take my sew head back to this petal point and check that I've got it all lined up. If you want to be absolutely sure that you've got things lined up nicely, you can actually remove the foot so that you can see the needle or the laser pointer more clearly. It looks like I do actually have a couple of millimeters that I could shift my pattern by. So that's helpful. Full view. Now I'm going to go to the sew options, DQ all, select just that piece, green, play, start. Okay, so we've finished all of the sections of border that we can on the left-hand side. I've moved my sew head back over to the right-hand side to get the other sections of vertical border done. If you can remember from before, I actually had to reduce the width of part of this because it was creeping into another border. So I think what I'm going to do is set the markers up first of all so I can see where the width of the border is on the quilt. So I'll go to markers and I will clear all of the ones that are lying around. And I'll use the sew head just to show myself how much border width I've got on the quilt. And if I join those together like that, I'll be able to see. Now, at the moment, they look like they're going to be crossing into another border. If I have a look, you can see here that it's going to look like it's going to be crossing over. So let's see what happens after we place it properly. So I'm going to take the sew head and place it on a petal point that's already been stitched around here somewhere. So that's where the sew head is. Oops, I don't want that bit. I've done that bit. So I can definitely fit that section in. Not that section, because it crosses over the safe area. So it's only a little piece. So that's the piece that I want to match up. So I shall go into actual view, actual sized view. And I shall pull the red bit down to there. And you can see that it's still crossing over into this border. So I think what I'll do is another little resize. I shall uncheck the maintain ratio and I will use the keypad and change this to 4.5, which is what I did with the section just further up. Just reducing it by 1/4 of an inch. Apply. Let's just check that it's going to be in exactly the right place. So I'm going to pull the tail to fit on top of the crosshairs again. It does fit within the border, although I did have to shrink it slightly. So you just sometimes have to make little compromises to get it to all line up. Let's go back into full view. And I'm just going to stitch that little section. So sew options, DQ all, select that bit, green, start. Qmatic has stitched that little section of shell border. So I've moved the sew head to the last stitch on the previous vertical spring border. That's where it is. So I'm just going to have a look and see how many pieces of spring border we can fit in safely. 2, I'd say. So there's this one and this one. Let's see if the start-stop points are in the right place when we try to connect them with attach. And that's okay. I think we will put some markers down because that bit of border is quite skinny. So I'm going to clear the other ones and I just want to see how much width I've got on the quilt. And I'll join them up. Green check. Okay. Now if we go in for a really close look, we'll see that it's quite a wonky looking border now as we get down the quilt. But it does fit within the area that it's allowed to go. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to take my sew head back up to here on the previous stitch point and just check that I've got it all lined up. So there's the crosshairs. And it just shows that sometimes you need to double check. And in actual fact, if anything, they're too far over here. Let's just try that again. Sometimes the laser has got slightly knocked out and it really could do with a reset. So I'm going to use the needle to check that I've got the right spot selected. In fact, I might even take my foot off for a minute. Okay, the needle is right on top of the last stitches. So I should put the foot back on. It's definitely worth doing. As you can see, I feel as though the springs are definitely getting a bit close to this line. So I might just double check, have another look. I've got about another millimetre I can move. Now I could go to resize and just adjust this slightly. On my quilt, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to be removing the erasable lines. If it was a pieced quilt, that would bother me. So I think I could consider reducing just that measurement, but I'm going to just leave it because it's actually not that bad. So we'll just say, yeah, it's all fine. Right, I'm going to go back into full view. Sew options, DQ all, select that piece, green, play, start point. The springy border has been stitched, just this little section. So now I need to sew part of this leafy section that's coming up. So I've moved the sew head, the crosshairs and the needle are right on top of the last stitches that got sewn here. So the next piece of leaf looks as though it's this one, only this one. If I click that one as well, you can see that it's outside the safe area. So just this one is going to get done. I'll go into actual size view and line it up as best I can. So I'm going to just move the red part. Now the tail of the red part is there and it has to go where the crosshairs are. Here. Come out into full view. Now I think we will certainly put down some markers to check and see what's happening, because even though I've tried to be accurate with my drawing and basted the quilt, it does move, it's fabric. So let's just see what room we've got. We'll clear the previous ones and we'll use the sew head to indicate where the width of the border is. Okay, I'm going to join those up. And it looks like it will fit quite nicely within the width of where it should be. I'm going to be extra secure and just check that that's lined up. So I'm going to take the sew head back to the last stitches on that leafy section. Being sure to line it up exactly. And then I'll go back into actual size view. And if I need to shift it just a little, then I will. So I want that red tail to fit right in the crosshair. And that's good. Full view so we can see. We'll go into our sew options. We'll DQ all. We'll select that bit. Green. Play. Start. And that piece of leafy vertical has slotted in very nicely. So the next thing to do is advance the quilt just a little bit so that we can get this second piece of medallion quilted. Okay, I have advanced the quilt and next I need to realign the safe area. So I've picked a part of the medallion design that I can recognize on screen, and I've put the sew head on top of a pointy part on the quilt. And I've had a good look at it and I know roughly where it should be. So I'm going to go to realign the safe area, snap to point, and it's around about there. So let's go into actual size to check. Somewhere. Well, there we are. It's actually on this point on the quilt. So this is the point of the screen that needs to correspond. So that looks good. Let's come back out into full view, green check. So you can see that this part of the medallion will fit in. So let's click it. So there's that piece and there's that piece. So we'll join them together. So I'll click that one. I will go to connect and I will attach it to the next door one like that. So they will get stitched in one go. And just as before, I'm going to use the boundary tool and select the 4 corners of this rectangle on my quilt so that it fits in exactly. So I shall use the sew head to do that job. So you can see a box has appeared to correspond with where I told the machine the corners were. So if I now, it's morphing to fit. I'm not asking for any margins. I want it right into the corners. So if I click green, you'll see it just shift slightly. There we go. And that's the bit I want to sew next. So I shall go to sew options, DQ all, select that part, green, play, start point. Qmatic has now stitched out the lower part of the medallion, and by using the boundary tool, it has matched it up and placed it absolutely spot on with the piece that goes above it. Now, we do have some room left to play with in the safe area, so we could put some of these borders in, but I might not put in as much as I could, because it might be better to then lay down the corners and the bottom border and then fit some of the side pieces in that way. We'll just have a quick look. So I'll just have a look to see if I can fit another leafy section in over here. So I'll take the sew head and place it right above the last stitches of the leafy section that has already been sewn. So the sew head is now in the correct position. This is the piece of leaf that needs to be shifted into position. So let's go to actual size. The sew head is where the crosshairs are. So let's just drag the red piece down, put it there, full view. Now, I think we will just use some markers to check that the width is correct. So go to the pin, we can clear away the other ones that we don't need and use the sew head to just mark out the width of the border. And I'll connect those up. I only need 4 because I'm only checking the width. Okay, green tick. So there's the blue box. Let's have a closer look. So it's in, which is fine. And as I did before, I'm just going to take the sew head back to that last stitch mark to check that everything is super accurate. And that looks good. Full view. Sew options, DQ all, select this part only, green, play, start. Qmatic has stitched that last little piece of vertical border, so I've actually brought the sew head back over to the right hand side, and I'm going to line up the needle with the last stitched point of that leafy section. And the next piece of pattern to be connected is that one. So let's go into actual sized view. And I can move this red piece down to those crosshairs. Go into a full view. Let's stick down some markers and check that there's enough width in the border. 4 markers is enough. Let's just join them up. Yes. And without even zooming in, I can see that it fits well within the area it's allowed to go. So to be doubly sure, I'll just take my needle back to the last stitches in the pattern above. Go into actual size view to check the position. Maybe a millimeter difference. That looks good. Full view. DQ all and select just the piece that we want to do. Green tick, play, start. Qmatic has done a very nice job of fitting in that last leafy section. It joins on nicely to the previous piece and it fits well within its borders. So I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to advance the quilt because I'm going to work on corners and the bottom parts and then squeeze in the last pieces that way round. Okay, I have actually advanced the quilt quite a long way because I had basted it, so nothing is terribly weird and stretchy. It's nice and tidy. So I've moved my sew head and positioned it right where the last stitches were on the leafy border. And I've actually highlighted in red where that was so that I'm going to be able to line things up nicely. The red piece this time is not the piece that I'm going to stitch next. It's just to show me where I stitched last on this occasion. So I'm going to have to realign my safe area and use snap to point. I'm going to roughly click the mouse where I think it is on the quilt. Then I'm going to go into actual size. Remember, I've highlighted it red so that I can see that's where I was, not to show where I'm going, which is a little bit odd. So the spot is there at the moment, and in actual fact, it needs to be there. So if we just go out into full view and press green for go, that's good. That's showing the safe area where I actually am on the quilt. Great. So what I'm going to do next is leave that little section out, and I'm going to try and do the corners and the bottom border. I don't have to do all of the corners, or both of the corners, that one, that bit, and that bit. I can do it in separate pieces if I like. And sometimes that can be easier because you could position that corner and then you could do this corner and then you could fit this piece in, just reducing the length if you have to. We'll have a look and see what looks like it's going to work. So the safe area is correctly set. What might be a good idea now is to go and clear all the markers that are on the quilt and just set out some markers showing where that bottom corner and that bottom border has to go. I've set quite a few markers this time because I want to really be able to see where the corners ought to go. So I'm going to connect them up, going round in a clockwise direction. What I really noticed on this occasion was that the lines where I've drawn out the quilt were definitely warped or wavy, and it's because this is fabric. Even though it's been basted, you can see there is a difference here. We can make up for that later if we want a truly straight quilt by blocking it nicely, but that is where the borders on the quilt actually are. Right, so that's that. And the blue section is showing where the borders are on the quilt. Okay, let's see if they fit in when they get a little move. Okay, the sew head is lining up with this piece of feather which had, or leaf that's already been stitched. We're missing out that section at the moment. This corner and bottom section is what we hope to be doing next. I'm going to join it up and see if it fits in the blue area. So let's try connecting it. Okay, so it's connected. And let's give it a little move. Right. Well, it does fit up and down the way, as you can see. It sticks out over this side. It looks like it could fit there. The only thing that, so I could do this all in one go by the look of things. If I'm really worried on a real quilt about how close it is to the seam line or the ditch, I could reduce this measurement here by adjusting the size. But it does fit. The only thing is that when we come to join this little section in later, it might not completely connect to that bit and that bit. We'll see. I think I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go into actual size view to really see if I've got equal spacing. Not bad going along that way. This is where we're going to go over the edge. So let's just drag it in a bit. Right up to the edge there. You can see how wonky the bottom is. So it's just touching the ditch line there. It's got a tiny bit of space there. Almost touching. It really depends on how much of a perfectionist you want to be. Let's come out into a full view and check it out. I'm going to say that will do. All right, so we're going to go to sew options. We're going to DQ all, and then we're going to select the bottom border and the corners. Green, play. Stop. Okay, Qmatic has accomplished its mission of sewing out this bottom border. So the next thing I could do is attend to this section here. So the next thing to do, we could set down the corner and the long piece and the other corner of the springs if they fit into the border on the quilt. I have to confess that this did go over just a tiny bit which is disappointing, but it's fabric and it's okay. Right, let's see if we can get this bit done. I'm going to clear these other markers and I'm going to set down some markers just to roughly show me where the corner goes on both sides and the width of where the springy border can fit in. So if we connect these markers up, we'll get an approximation of where the corners and bottom border should go. Oops, click connect markers. You can see that it's a little bit up and down. Okay, so that's where it has to fit within that there. Now, it could be that it would be a better plan to do this in small chunks, so we can break it up and just do a bit at a time if we want to. But let's see if we can risk doing it all in one go. So we'll go to actual size. We'll click the red springs so we can see them. We'll click the springs so that we can see them. They do fit there. And they do fit there. Okay, well, I'm going to join them up. Let's try and connect the corners and the long border together. You will probably have to go and have a look and check to see where their stop points are. Otherwise they might attach weirdly. That looks about right. Okay, so they're connected. I'm going to go to actual size view. They're reasonably well placed up and down the way. So I have to look at how far away this is from the borderline. I could probably move it over a little bit. I might want to zoom out a bit. Not necessarily all the way because it's too far away to see properly. Quilt it. So let's go to sew options, DQ all, select only the piece I want to stitch, which is this piece, green, play, start point. Qmatic has now sewn out this bottom springy border. Now would be a good chance to file and save if you haven't done for a while. I'm going to be checking my bobbin and bobbin area, and then I'll have to move the quilt so that the safe area comes back up here a bit, because we've still got some pieces of vertical border to finish. And don't forget to save the project periodically. And it's the copy that we're saving. And we're replacing what we did before. Okay, I have advanced the quilt so that we're going to be just working in this last section. So Qmatic needs to realign the safe area. I've put my sew head around about here on this little part of the heart motif. So I shall go to realign safe area, snap to point, and click roughly where I think I've positioned my sew head. Go to actual sized view and find that spot. Quite close, but that's where it actually is there. Full view, green check. So that's my new safe area. So I think the next thing to do is going to be this shell border down here and the corners, possibly missing out the little joining section and slot that in at the end. So I'm going to take my sew head over and line it up with one of the last areas that got stitched of this shell border. I've taken the sew head to the last spot that got sewn on that shell border. And then if we just click this next bit here, we can see that connected at the moment, we've got that last piece of corner and the border that comes along there. I don't think we've sewn that little bit there. So we'll just see if we can get that bit done. And I think I'll leave that bit until the last minute. So that's where we've got to go. Let's go into actual size view and line it up. I can either line it up first or set my markers first. It doesn't desperately matter. That's where it's going. Now I am going to set some markers to check that it all fits in nicely. So if I go back to the markers, clear the ones I had up, and I want to be able to indicate where this L-shaped section of border and corners should go. So I'm using my sew head for that job. That is showing where it needs to be placed. I'm going to connect up the markers and then I'll get a box. Okay, so the shells have to fit within this U shape. They might just. I have a closer look. They're very close to this border. Let's just move them up a tiny bit. And then have a look at each end. Not quite touching that side, not quite touching that side, almost. Let's just move it over a fraction. Okay, now I'm going to check my placing. I'm going to take my sew head back over here and check that that's all going to be lined up. Okay, the sew head is now on the quilt at the petal point. On the screen, it's there, but on the quilt, it's there. So I'm going to have to move this over, which could make a difference if we go out to full view. As you can see, it's going to be sticking out into this border. Let's have a closer view. Zoom in, zoom in. Okay, so it fits down this side. It fits fairly well along here, although it's very close to that border. Let's zoom in a bit more. It is actually touching that border and it's over that border. So I think I'm going to do a little bit of a resize. So we'll go to the resize tool and we'll take a note of what these measurements currently are. So jot it down, we'll take a photo. I'm actually going to uncheck the maintain ratio. And the first thing I'm going to do is just reduce this by a little bit because I quite like it not to touch this border. So maybe take approximately 1/4 of an inch off-ish. Let's go to 7.8. I know that's not exactly 1/4 of an inch, but it's something. Remember, make a note of what that measurement was in case you want it to go back. Okay, and apply. Okay, so it is going to be more within the blue up and down the way, so that's pretty good. Now, let's Make sure that the maintain ratio is not checked, and let's just shave a little bit off the length. So 29.76. It's not far over, so let's just take it back to 29. Could even go to 29 and a half. Let's actually see what that looks like. Apply. Okay. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to give it a green tick. And then because it got resized, I'm going to make sure that it is lining up with the crosshairs. So actual size. Zooming over, zooming up. Crosshairs are there. It's there. So that's good. Full view. Is it fitting in on this end? Let's just have a look over here again. There's no harm in checking. Okay, it looks fine. You can zoom in and out as many times as you like. Right, let's get that stitched. So we'll go to sew options, DQ all, just select that piece, green, play, start point. Okay, we've now got the bottom shell border and this corner stitched, and it matches up remarkably well. So that's great. So just a few vertical sections to connect everything up together and finish off the whole cloth quilt. Let's go for what hopefully will be an easy one, and those are the leafy sections. So I said easy, let's see. So I've taken the sew head to the point where this last section needs to connect up. So let's see what happens. If we go into actual size view, there is where the sew head is. So we need to pull this red section down like that onto the crosshairs. And then I think we'll go down and have a look. Now, you can see that we've got a little bit of a crossover to the corner that's already been stitched. So we could either leave it and decide that that wasn't at all offensive, or we could consider shortening it a bit. So let's go to resize and take a careful note of what size it is at the moment and uncheck the maintain ratio. Now 9.13, it looks as though it's possibly around about half an inch too long. Let's have a look and see. We take off roughly a little bit, and this isn't, should we take off? Let's go to 8.75 with the keypad. Let's have a little look. 8.75. Okay. Apply. And green check. All right. It's still overlapping a little bit here. Let's put it back onto the crosshairs. It's still overlapping a bit. Not by much. Let's go back into resize. Let's uncheck the maintain ratio and go down with the keypad to 8.5 perhaps. Apply. It's just crossing over here. It fits there very nicely. Let's go back up here. Okay. I could shave off another little bit. I could say that it was okay, but let's have a look. Let's get rid of that. Let's take off 1/4 of an inch with the keypad. Let's go to 8.25. Remembering 8.5 was quite good if we want to remember that. Apply green, check. Right, so it doesn't cross over now, but it also doesn't quite meet down here. Oops. Well, hang on, I need to get it red. There it is, it's right on the crosshairs. I'd say it's close enough for me to be extremely happy with it. Let's go back into full view. I'm not going to place markers because it's only a short section and I know that it's lined up with that starting point. So let's just sew it. Let's go to sew options, DQ all, select that little piece, green, play, start point. Well, the leafy border is complete and it matches up remarkably well. So the next thing to do is finish off this section of springs as we're over on this side. The sew head has been placed on top of the last stitches of the last part of the springs that have already been sewn. The start stops look a little bit muddled up here, so let's click the first one that we think we have to join. And it looks like we're going to get 1, 2, 3. It looks like 3 have to be done. I'm going to have to go into actual size view to have a look at the start points, I think. That's the first piece of spring that needs to be sewn. Let's go into actual size view so we can see where the start points are and swap that one. And on that one. And that one. Now we need to join them up. I will actually come out and look again because sometimes it's difficult to see which piece is which. So that's the first piece. We need to attach it to that piece and that piece. So that's the section that we need to do because we've done the corner. Right. I think it's best if we put down some markers to show the width of this. Let's clear the ones from before and we'll use the sew head to show where the border is on the quilt. What we'll do, I'm going to connect them up. Okay. So even from this view, it would appear that they're going to fit into the blue box, which indicates where the border is on the quilt. So I'm just going to check that I've placed that well. I've got my sew head right on top of the previous stitches. Let's have an actual sized view. Right, so the red springs have to move down to here on screen. Now it looks like they are overlapping here. Now, what I could do, I could deliberately make that just a tiny bit longer and allow it to stitch on top of that loop, which is what I think I'm going to do. So let's go to resize and let's just make it a tiny bit bigger. I think it was 7.55. Uncheck that maintain ratio, go to the keypad, go to 7.65, okay, apply. It's very tiny. I wonder if I could reduce it by 0.2 or something ridiculous. So let's have a look. Let's go for 7.63. Apply. Well, to my mind, that is virtually right on top of a previous spring. You're hardly going to see it. And I think that's the quickest and easiest way of doing it. So I'm going to say that I'm happy with that. Let's just check that the crosshairs are where they want to be. I'm going to go to sew options, DQ all, select that piece, and I'm going to give it the go ahead to go. If I wanted to, I could actually stop the stitching once it starts to overlap over here. I'll see what it looks like when it's sewing. Okay, that side of springy border is done. The overlap is not quite as accurate as I thought it was going to be. It's not bad. I can actually unpick a few stitches and it'll look great. Okay, I have moved my sew head across to the right-hand side of the quilt, and I have to fit in this piece. So let's have a closer look on actual size. So their crosshairs are here, and I should just move it down to here. I think that's very good this end. I'm not going to try to make any adjustments. I'm going to go straight into sew options, DQ all, and select the small piece that I want to stitch, which is there. Green, play, start. That last little section of shell border has matched up extremely well. I don't know how well we're going to get on with this last little piece of spring, because on the quilt, the bottom corner is quite close to the right-hand side of the border, and the bit that's further up is further over towards the left-hand side of the border. So somehow we've got to fit this middle section in between and make it look visually appealing. So the sew head is on the last stitch of the bit that's already been sewn. So I have to do this piece, this piece, this piece. So 3 pieces. Let's get them joined together. Hopefully the start points are in the right place. Okay, so that's them connected. Let's go into actual size view and see. Right, you can see that this is quite a long way from there. I think we're going to put down some markers. Let's come out into the full view. Right, so to try and alleviate the problem of the bottom of the springs and this further up part of the springs being in a sort of different position, we'll put some markers down and see what we can do. Right, that is where they need to go. And here they are in the blue box, but I haven't got them lined up. So we'll see what happens. Right, I've got the crosshairs back on top of where they need to be on the last stitches that were sewn in this springy section. Let's go into actual size view. Right, you can see that it's well past the crosshairs. Okay, and then what about what's happening down here? It really wants to match up to there, but it's kind of way off. But what I could do is get part of the tail to cross over there. And then I can always unpick a few extra stitches at the end. But it doesn't actually come down quite far enough. I'm just going to see if I can lengthen that a tiny bit. Let's go to resize. Uncheck maintain ratio. It's probably a good ½ inch too short. Let's see. So it's 7.55 to begin with. Let's use the keypad. Let's see if we can go to 8. Apply. That's too much. So somewhere in between. 7.75. Okay, nearly. Before I agree to that, let's just, yeah. Just want it to come down a tiny bit more. Let's go for 7.85. Sometimes you've just got to have a little guess. Well, I think that looks pretty good. It's within the blue box. There's going to be a bit of an issue here with it disappearing off the edge of the corner, which is not ideal. But you have to decide, do you want it to match the corner or do you want it to match over here? That is a tricky one. I think what I'm going to do is just go for what visually looks better on this occasion. So it comes close to here. It comes close to here. I can unpick these tails and I think it will look okay. So options, DQ all, select that little section, green, play. Stop. Okay, springs are done. We've got one piece left in this leafy border over here. So let's take the sew head to the last stitches that were done in that leafy border. The section that needs to come in is here. Let's go into actual size view. Remember, we're trying to line up with the crosshairs. Hope it's not gone weird. Whoops. Let's go down and have a look. Ooh, yes. Now, it looks like we're going to be crossing over, which is not ideal. Just to be sure, I'm going to bring my crosshairs down to this point and we'll just see what that looks like. That's where they are. So we either line up with the top end or we line up with the bottom end. It looks like we can't have both. I thought this last piece was going to be so easy. Let's set down some markers then. Clear the others. And I'm just going to put them here so I can check where everything is going to be fitting. Okay, so it definitely fits within the area where it's meant to go. But we're going to have to make a decision about which end matches. Let's have a look. So there's a whole leaf and a curl here, which is overlapping. Right, so I've put my crosshairs back on the last stitches. On the screen, it looks like it should be there, but on the quilt, it's there. So if I put that there like that, and I whiz to the other end, it overlaps quite significantly. But there is quite a long piece here that could be unpicked if necessary. So let's just see how close I dare go. Now let's have a look further down. No, it still overlaps. So I think the answer is going to be to shorten it. It overlaps by quite a bit. Right, let's go into the resize. Okay, width-wise, it's fine. Let's untick maintain ratio. It looks like it could easily be an inch. So let's take a whole inch and a wee bit off. Keypad. Let's just say it's going to be 8. Apply. Well, now it's a bit too short. I could unpick part of that and make this just a little bit longer. So I'll just keep adjusting. Shall I make it 8.5? Too much? How about 8.4? Can I seriously reduce it anymore? Let's see. How about 8.35? Apply. Okay, so it's not overlapping here, it's touching. It is overlapping here, but I could unpick that little section, which would look fine. And I could unpick anything over here that overlaps that doesn't look good. Position-wise, it's good. Size-wise, it's good. It doesn't perfectly match here, but, you know, I could easily freehand a little section in here if I thought it looked rubbish. So I'll just say green to go, full view. So options, TQ all, select this last piece, green, play, start point. And with that, we have finished the entire whole cloth quilt. There are a couple of places where if you absolutely scrutinize, things don't quite match up, but you'd have to be really searching for it. Overall, it is absolutely super. Delighted with it. It's been a bit of a marathon session. You don't have to do it all in one day because you can quite easily save and go back to it another day, but we've done it. And all that remains now is to get this video cobbled together.